Good evening, everybody. Welcome. So, of all age groups, there's one particular age group that is stereotypically the messiest. And that is college students, university-age students. That particularly the ones of the male variety are famous for being quite messy in the way they live and their dorms, the way they keep them, are a little bit to be desired. And so there was in one particular university, there was an observation that in the lunchroom, the cafeteria, where all the students would gather to have their lunch, so there was a habit of students leaving their dirty trays on the tables. Right? The system was that you would take a tray, get served at the servery, and then take it to your table, eat. And there was an expectation that you would take your tray back, return it, and throw your garbage out. And if each person did that, so then it would be done very simply. But an overwhelming majority of students didn't do it, would just leave their dirty tray there on the table. So whether this was a sign of bad upbringing, that they didn't take their plates to the kitchen when they grew up as kids, or a laziness when they're students, whatever it was, that was the reality. And so the university, in the restaurant there, they put up signs saying, "Please return your trays, throw out your garbage." To no avail. It just didn't change anything. And nothing changed until somebody from one of the faculties in the university itself, studying human behavior, came up with a little experiment that may change things. And this experiment actually had a huge impact on the tray situation in the university. How so? We're going to see, when we look into this chapter 43 of Tanya, a mode of changing our behavior and disciplining ourselves that can come from the outside. We'll see how it connects in a little while. In chapter 43 of Tanya, Rabbi Zalman continues the theme that we've been discussing the last couple of chapters, the fear of God, having awe. And in it he divides several layers of fear. That there's not just one type of fear and awe of God, there are several layers. And he explores them and offers methods and strategies of how to develop levels of awe of God within our personality. There's a quote from the Talmud that says the following: "Where there is no awe, there is no wisdom. And where there is no wisdom, there is no awe." Here, all referring to the awe of God. If there's no awe of God, there's no wisdom. And if there's no wisdom, there's no awe. What does that mean? Is that true? Here, the Talmud seems to be connecting awe of God with wisdom. Two topics that, at first glance, we would not necessarily have connected. Having awe of God is an emotional reaction to the presence of God. Having wisdom is thinking straight, having a solid view of the world, having a profound understanding of reality. They seem to be two quite disparate areas of life, awe of God and wisdom. Can you not have a very wise person who doesn't have any awe of God? Can you not have somebody who's very God-fearing but not all that wise? Here it says, where there's no awe, there's no wisdom. And where there's no wisdom, there's no awe. Is that a true statement? It seems to be saying that without awe of God, there's no wisdom. Which is perhaps something that we can observe in the world that we live in today. That we live in a world where awe of God is not necessarily high on the priorities of the general society. We don't take our morality so much from God and divine sources. The common belief today in many circles is that morality is something that we can work out ourselves without any higher being. Human beings can work it out themselves. And therefore, without the awe of God, there's not a lot of wisdom anymore. That the wisdom that is presented as wisdom is not all that wise. People's the general populace and the way they think shifts from one week to another sometimes. What's considered the common wisdom keeps on changing. There's not a lot of clarity when it comes to real life issues. Wisdom is lost. In fact, in some ways, wisdom is a bit of a lost art. To have a really wise person needs to be, you can only have wisdom if you're grounded in a solid view of reality, in a view that is unchanging, where there are axioms and there's truths that are eternal. Then you can have wisdom. Without that, the mind shifts from one thing to another. It's easily convinced one way or the other. Wisdom is something that lasts. And to have something that lasts, you have to have an awe of something above you, something bigger than you. The human being is finite, is changing. But there's a divine reality that is unchanging, and that's where wisdom comes from. If you don't have awe, you can't have wisdom. But where there's no wisdom, there's no awe. Which means seemingly that the awe of God cannot come from ignorance. It doesn't come from superstition. You need wisdom. You need clarity. You need to study. You need to learn. You need to receive the wisdom to have awe of God. To fear God because you don't know what He is, so you're scared of the unknown. That's not awe of God. That's not fear of God. That's fear of the unknown. You have to have wisdom. You have to have a source that gives you direction in order to have true awe and fear of God. It can't come out of a lack of knowledge. It has to come from a place of wisdom. And so where there's no awe, there's no wisdom. Where there's no wisdom, there's no awe. Does that make sense? There's only one problem with that. If you have no awe, you can't come to wisdom. If you have no wisdom, you can't have awe. So, where do you start? How do you get awe without wisdom? Because to have wisdom, you need awe. But to have awe, you need wisdom. So, where is one supposed to start? If I'm neither awestruck nor all that wise, and the Talmud tells me, well, where there's no awe, there's no wisdom. So what do I need first? I need awe to have wisdom. But if I read the next line, where there's no wisdom, there's no awe. So to get awe, I need the wisdom. But I need the wisdom to get the awe. And so on and so forth. It's a circular argument, a catch-22. There's nowhere to begin. A bit like where it says, I can't get a job because I don't have experience, because I can't get a job because I don't have experience, etc., etc. It goes on forever. So how are you supposed to start? Where do you start? I don't have awe because I don't have wisdom, but to have wisdom I need awe. So where are you supposed to begin? Where are you supposed to put your feet into this? What are you supposed to start with? An awe of God? Well, you need wisdom for that. Wisdom, but you need to have awe to have wisdom. So where are you supposed to start? In chapter 43 of Tanya, Rabbi Zalman says that when we read this saying, we have to understand that there's two types of awe here. That the awe in the first phrase is talking about one level of awe of God, and that has to come first before you can have any wisdom. But then there's a second level of awe of God that can only come after you've had the wisdom. And so it starts with awe, goes to wisdom, and leads to awe on a higher level. It's not the same one as we started with. And so for this we need to divide up and understand the various levels of awe of God and what these mean. So we'll start with a quote from the Talmud. Another quote, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, one of the great sages of the Roman period in the land of Israel. He blessed his disciples and he said to them, this was at the end of his life, may the fear of heaven be upon you like the fear of flesh and blood. May the fear of heaven, of God, be upon you like the fear of flesh and blood. Just like you have fear of people, so too you should have fear of God. His disciples said to him, is that all? That's the blessing, that we should have fear of God like we have fear of people? Shouldn't our fear of God be greater than our fear of other people? So he said to them, if only you can attain this. You can see for yourselves. When a man wants to commit a sin, he says, I hope no one will see me. And so Rabbi Yochanan tells his students, at the very least, you should try and achieve the level of fear of God to be equal to the way we fear other people. If we would fear God the way we fear other people, so then we would do the right thing, because we always make sure no one's looking when we do the wrong thing. And if we find out somebody's looking, somebody's watching us, so we get scared. Like it says, there was one great rabbi who was traveling along the way and he saw somebody picking fruit from a field, from somebody else's field, just taking it. So the rabbi whispered to him and said, someone's watching. So the guy quickly jumped onto the wagon and looked around and said, there's no one there. What do you mean someone's watching? So he pointed upwards. Someone's watching. If someone's watching, suddenly we don't want to do anything wrong. Yeah, someone's watching. So Rabbi Yochanan says you should at least fear God as much as you fear human beings. That you don't do something naughty right in front of other people. So at least give God the same presence as another person. At least that. So when he gave them the blessing originally, they thought this is a belittling the fear of God. We should fear heaven like we fear flesh and blood. And his response to them was, if only you can get that. Just make God as real as the person walking down the street, and that will be good. This is the entry level of fear of God. The entry level of fearing God as we would another human being. That his reality should be as real to us as another person watching us. This was discussed in last week's chapter 42. The idea that God is present, and if you feel God's present, his eyes are watching you, so then you do the right thing. This was the experiment that I mentioned, was a group of scientists at Newcastle University Center for Behavior and Evolution. Conducted a field experiment hanging up posters of staring human eyes and observing the change in people's behavior as a result. Posters of human eyes. What was it? Over the course of 32 days, the scientists spent many hours recording the customers' littering behavior in their university's main cafeteria, counting the number of people that cleaned up after themselves after their meals. The posters were hung at eye level, and every day the location of each poster was randomly determined. So somewhere around the cafeteria, they'll put a poster with picture of human eyes. The researchers found that during periods when the posters of eyes, instead of flowers, overlooked the diners, twice as many people cleaned up after themselves. So they had posters of flowers up that didn't have any effect. When the posters of eyes were up, twice as many people cleaned up after themselves. A poster. Now, no one was thinking that these are real eyes watching me. So what effect did this poster have on people? It seems that was just enough to just remind you that there's an eye watching you, to make you feel that there's an eye watching you. It's almost like, and the way they understood it was that there's some very primal sense we have that if we catch an eye looking at us, we behave differently. So just like before we do something that we know is wrong, we give a quick scan of the room to see if anyone's watching. And this is almost subliminal. We don't even realize that we're checking, is anyone watching? And if people are looking the other way, we've got our little in. We've got our opportunity. And if there's that eye looking at us, we have some inner blockage to doing the wrong thing. We can't do it. Someone's watching. And this was so primal and deep within us that here the poster on the wall was good enough to affect us to, you can't just get up and leave the tray if someone's watching you. And surely this was not a conscious decision, because nobody would decide, well, I can't leave the tray if a poster has eyes looking at me. It's the sense of eyes looking at me. That's what did it. And so when the Talmud says that you should imagine the eye watching you, the divine eye watching you, that language is quite exact. an eye watching, an eye seeing what you're doing. Another experiment, using a public goods game to examine the hypothesis that human subjects use an involuntary eye detector mechanism for evaluating the level of privacy. So this was a computer game that was somehow about doing good for people, putting you in some type of simulated experience where you had the opportunity to interact with people and to do good or not to do good. And the experiment was to see if there was an eye detector that we have within ourselves, that an eye is watching us, and see how that affects us. Half of the subjects were watched by images of a robot presented on their computer screen. The robot, named Kismet and invented at MIT, is constructed from objects that are obviously not human with the exception of its eyes. That's what it looked like. In this experiment, Kismet produced a significant difference in behavior. Subjects who were watched by Kismet contributed 29% more to the public good than subjects in the same setting without Kismet. So this is a computer game now with this robotic being that has nothing that actually looks realistic except the eyes are quite real. And people were 29% better. They did more good if they had this fellow watching them. Which, again, it's crazy. You're not really being watched. It's not even real. And yet that impacted you. A poster on the wall, a robot on the computer, makes you behave better. And so when our sages said that you have to always conjure the watching eye of God over you, they knew what they were talking about. This is the basic entry-level fear and awe of God, that He's watching, that He's there. And that will bring you to do good, to do the right thing. Now, of course, here this is talking about an eye detector. These researchers believe that we have an eye detector that senses very quickly if an eye is looking at us. You know that feeling you're being stared at? Sometimes you just feel that somebody's looking at you from across the room. We have some detection, some sensitivity to being watched. And that affects our behavior. What Tanya is teaching us is that we have to engender and develop a sense of the divine presence, that God has to become real to us, as real as an eye watching us, and then that will affect our behavior. And if at a moment where we are tempted to do the wrong thing, we stop and contemplate the watching eye, that God is watching over us, like that guy trying to steal the fruit, someone's watching. If we remind ourselves someone's watching, so then we will have better control over our behavior to not only avoid doing bad, but in these cases, doing good as well. We'll do more good because we can't just leave it up. We can't be lazy. You can sometimes pretend that you didn't see somebody who needs your help. But if someone's watching you, they see you, you can't pretend anymore. It's that eye contact. It's interesting, another experiment that you can do yourselves. When you're in busy traffic, like we often experience in this area, and let's say you're trying to move in, you're like parked on the side and you're trying to move into the lane of traffic, or you're coming from like a side street like Roscoe Street, trying to turn into a busy street, and there's one car after the other going, and the traffic is such that there's no real gaps in the traffic for you to get in there. So you're basically waiting for the goodwill of somebody to let you in. Because if no one lets you in, you might be there for half an hour. There's actually no other way of getting in there. Now, there are some people who are nice just by nature, and they just let people in. Like they see someone waiting and they let people in. Which, by the way, when we're on that end of things, the opportunity to let somebody in, it's a very nice thing to do. Let them in, not because they pushed in, but just let someone in. It's a good thing to do, and you'll notice that you actually won't arrive later to your destination by letting somebody in. It's quite amazing, but it really doesn't make a difference. Even though we're all in a very big rush because we all have extremely important, urgent things to do, we can let somebody in and it will be okay. But if you're on the end when you're trying to get in, a very effective way of being more likely to be let in is to look at the oncoming drivers, to actually try and make eye contact with them. Because it's much easier to not let in a car. It's much harder to not let in a person. When you've actually made eye contact with somebody, they're human, you've connected with them, you're more likely to want to let them in. First of all, because of that human contact, but also because now you've been seen. It's not a car not letting me in, it's a person not letting me in. They've seen me, they've made eye contact. And we behave better when we're seen. So you can try that one yourselves and see if it works. So this is the what's called the entry level of fear. The entry level of fear of God, of fear of heaven, of having awe of God, is someone is watching you. And that's the most basic level, which can be taught to little children, and should be taught to little children, and should be engendered as a part of our mentality. The basic level of not doing the wrong thing and encouraging good behavior is that someone's watching, and therefore you're answerable for your behavior. And so we should train ourselves to do that, and that's something that's available, that's realistic. We can always call upon. But it's only the entry level of fear. We don't only avoid doing the wrong thing because we're being watched, and do good because somebody is seeing what we're doing. We should try to go to a higher level of awe and fear of God as well. A more advanced fear would be when we observe and look at the universe. That itself can engender within us a greater awe of God. By observing God's creation, we can be more in awe of God's presence on a higher level than simply He's watching us, but for Him Himself. That God is watching me is that I am being watched. But that God is awesome in His creation is a more advanced level of awe. It's still on a somewhat basic level. It's not the highest level, as we'll see, but it's a more advanced fear than the basic one of someone's watching me. By observing the universe that God created, that itself, it engenders and arouses an awe of God. Many people feel this when they see nature and when they're in nature. So you can be in awe of nature, but to take it to the next step and say, well, who created this? Who's the source of this nature? Who made this? Who brought it about? It's all from God. That makes us in awe of God. And so when we see the vast oceans, or a beautiful mountain, or a beautiful butterfly, and to think that this is God's creation, this is what God has brought about, that makes us in awe of God, of His power, of His awesomeness, of His greatness. And this, in fact, Maimonides says, is a way to find God. Just like you can find God through studying His wisdom in the Torah, you can find God through studying His creation in the world. And that's why the Jewish tradition has always encouraged the study of science and the natural world, because that will lead to a greater awe of God. It's God's creation that you're studying. The better you know it, the more you see about it, the more you're exposed to the wonders of creation, the more awe you'll be more in awe you'll be of God. And so it's not a contradiction to faith. On the contrary, it bolsters faith when you see the wonders of creation. Looking at the universe will bring us into awe. But it's interesting, in the writings of Rabbi Shneur Zalman, he explains on a much deeper level what it means to be in awe of God by looking at the universe. And he does that by a gradual meditation on the creation of the world, on the way the universe is, and extrapolating God from it. And from that we see the greatness of God through the creation that he made. Not just on how amazing and wonderful the world is, but on how vast the world is, and at the same time how small it is. How so? Let's go through the steps. If we look, let's say, at this beach. This is 80 Mile Beach. Do you know where 80 Mile Beach is? It's in the Kimberley area of Western Australia, the north part of Western Australia, 80 Mile Beach. So when you think of 80 miles, a stretch of beach that just goes on and on and on. Imagine yourself standing on the shore of that beach. It's awe-inspiring, like this endless, beautiful sand and the water, and just an untouched part of the world in a way that looks so natural, like from the first day of creation.
Maybe Israel. They're considering that beach in Israel.
That's right. Yeah. True. So imagine yourself on that beach. You feel, if you're standing on an 80-mile beach, you feel small. You feel humbled by just the expanse of creation. And looking at that and thinking that God created this beach. I mean, how many grains of sand on this beach, on an 80-mile beach? And each one was created by God. It's the mind would boggle. You just sit there and look, and you can't even see the end of it. And like, if you would start walking or jogging or running, so I mean, I shouldn't speak for you. For myself, if I'd start running, it would still seem endless, because an 80-mile beach, how much can I run of that already? And I'm still not going to see the end. It's awe-inspiring. But if you would then contemplate the fact that this beach, 80 miles of it, is still only a small part of a large coastline. I mean, Western Australia, it stretches that coastline on and on and on. When you're down there in the beach, it looks endless. You go up in an aeroplane, it still looks endless. It just goes on and on and on. Not just from the puny view of a little human being looking at the view. Of course you can't see the end of it. Even up there, like, it just disappears into forever, this coastline. It goes on and on and on. So it's not just my little perception, it's really big. But that itself, even that view, is still looking at a small section of the coastline of Western Australia. It'll be somewhere up here in this very northern part of it. But it probably wouldn't, even that 80-mile beach would not actually really feature on this map. Like if you would put a point, that would be the 80 miles. So that entire beach is just a little point in this huge coastline of Western Australia. A minuscule point. So remember yourself, you are on that beach, feeling the awesomeness, the expansiveness of this beach. But then when you actually put it into perspective of the coastline of Western Australia, it's a little blip, like a tiny point. Which, that itself, Western Australia is also only a section of the entire Australia and the coastline of Australia. Where again, like that point would be totally lost. Those 80 miles would be completely lost in this satellite picture of Australia. Like you wouldn't be able to even point to it. So you're still on the beach. And you're on this huge beach. It's big for you. But it's nothing compared to the coastline that it's a part of, which is nothing compared to the entire shape and contours of the Australian continent. It's nothing, but you're still on the beach. Looking at the expansiveness, imagining that expansiveness is actually like nothing. And that Australia itself is only one island on the globe. It's not the whole world. It's a small part of the world. And you're on that little point on the beach, but you're not just on a beach. You're on a coastline, which is a part of an entire side of the land, which is a part of an entire country, which is a part of an entire globe. And so you're getting smaller and smaller relative to where you're at. When you thought you were quite a big being, big person, taking up space, but on the beach you're made to feel small. But when that beach is a part of a coastline, which is a part of a country, which is a part of a globe, so in terms of the planet, it's tiny where we are. It's a tiny little spot. And the planet itself is just one planet in a solar system. And when you put that into perspective, it's just over there, 3 away from the sun. It's not a big part of the solar system. It's a little ball in the solar system. You're still on this big beach, and the beach is still big for you. But that bigness is nothing compared to the country, the Earth, and then the solar system. Like this, Earth is like this tiny little thing in the space of the solar system, which itself, that solar system, is just one little part of a huge galaxy, which can be also totally lost when you look at the Milky Way galaxy. There's a spot somewhere in there which is the sun, the biggest entity in our solar system. But in its system, in the galaxy that it's in, that sun is lost as another little speck. I mean, the beach is there too. The beach is in this galaxy somewhere, and so are you. But like the significance of it is, it just becomes minuscule upon minuscule, more and more and more, to the nth degree. Not that this galaxy is the end of the Earth either, the end of reality. The galaxy itself is a part of a neighborhood of galaxies. This, astronomers have put together our neighborhood, putting the Milky Way galaxy in the center of it. There are 50,000 galaxies in this neighborhood, putting us in the center. Not that we're in the center of the universe, just in this neighborhood of the universe. This is our galaxy at the center, and in that galaxy is our solar system, and in our solar system is the Earth, and in that Earth is our country, Australia, and in that country, Australia, is Western Australia, and in Western Australia is an 80-mile beach where you're still sitting and wondering. But this is our galaxy's neighborhood, 50,000 galaxies around us, and that's just what's nearby, relatively speaking. That's just the area we're in. If we would expand it even further, so the universe, the expansiveness of the universe, and our area, our neighborhood is just over there with a Milky Way galaxy in the middle of it, but it goes beyond, 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 beyond. The universe is not infinite. The universe is finite. It ends, according to the Kabbalistic writings. The universe is physical, and all physical things have an end, which is interesting because science says the universe is expanding, which also means that it's finite, it's expanding. And it's around this point that our brains switch off completely and say, okay, I can't really go further than that, like beyond the universe. Where can we go now? So we could stop there, and already there's a sense of awe for the creation that we're in. We thought the beach was big, and it is big. Compared to my backyard, it's big. But in relation to where it is, that beach is tiny. It's a tiny part of the Western Australian coastline, a tiny part of Australia, a tiny part of the globe. And the globe, the planet Earth, is a tiny part of our solar system, which is a tiny part of the Milky Way galaxy, which is a tiny part of the neighborhood of 50,000 galaxies, which is a tiny part of the universe. And so if you're in awe of that beach, if you're impressed with the grains of sand on that beach that God created, He didn't just create that, He created this whole shebang. The entire universe He created. And it wasn't hard. It wasn't difficult for Him to create the universe. He said, let there be, and there was. He decided there should be a universe, and it was. This was not a major project. This wasn't taking exerted effort to create. He said there should be a universe, and there was. That was it. With all the expansiveness of the entire universe and all these galaxies, and with all the detail of every grain of sand on the beach that you're standing on. All of that is finite. All of that is limited. It's a created reality. God is infinite. And for an infinite being to create a finite world, it's not difficult. What's impressive is that he bothered, that he limited himself to a finite world. Because this meditation needs one more step. To really appreciate the depth of this continuum of going from your place on the beach to the entire universe, we need to go one more step beyond the universe as well. Because that entire universe is also contained somewhere. It's contained in what the Kabbalists called the tzimtzum, the contraction, the empty space that God created in order for physicality to emerge, even for spiritual reality to emerge. The universe also has a context. There's a simple picture that's drawn, and it's dangerous to draw pictures of this because we're talking now about spiritual reality, not physical reality. But the Kabbalists described it as that before creation, before there was a universe, God filled all existence. There was just God. In order for there to be creation, which God wanted to create a universe, he made a space, an emptiness in his presence where he hid away his light, and in that emptiness he allowed there to emerge worlds. First spiritual worlds, and then eventually a physical world. And so in the center point of this gaping hole that God created, an absence of his light, in the center of that is a little tiny point where the universe exists. In other words, physicality only begins at this center point of the emptiness of the divine space. Beyond that is spirituality. In other words, if you got to the end of the universe and you kept going, where would you end up? In theory, if that were possible, where would you end up? Outside of the physical realm. Outside of the ends of the physical universe is spirituality. Non-physical, metaphysical reality. Which again is beyond our imagination. We can't imagine a border between physical and spiritual where you can go on one side and then move to the other. It's conceptual, but the idea is that that vast universe exists within a spiritual context, a spiritual reality. And all that universe is a dot of nothingness. From the divine perspective, from God's creative perspective, it was God hiding himself to allow there to be a physical world and wanting it to be. That's all. And so as real and as significant as a fleeting thought in your mind, that's how real and significant the physical world is. God decided, and it was. So if you contemplate that, if you take the contemplation going from the beach to the coastline, to the country, to the planet, to the solar system, to the galaxy, to the universe, and then to the next step and says, well, the universe is just a little point in the entire vastness of spiritual reality. That means that the grain of sand that you are appreciating on the beach, that grain of sand, that's the universe. The entire universe is in that grain of sand from a divine perspective. And then go forward and say, well, if the whole universe is a grain of sand, so in that grain of sand there's a Milky Way galaxy neighborhood, with a Milky Way galaxy, with a solar system, with an Earth, with an Australia, with a Western Australia, with a beach, in the grain of sand. When that becomes real to you, then you're in awe of God.
from what you've just said, you've got to ask the question, how can I be of any relevance? Any at all? In any way?
Yeah, that's a great question. How could I be of any relevance if, in the scheme of such a huge universe, how can I be of any relevance? So if relevance meant being big, physically big, we're in big trouble. Because we're completely minuscule and tiny. Like, our significance is percentage-wise of the universe, and then the spirit, we're nothing. But if significance, if meaning, if a being of value means that God notices you and cares about you, then we're fine. Because this whole system was created for us. In that entire system that we just examined, there's only one being that has freedom of choice and has the ability to recognize this story. There's only one creature in the entire system that can be talking about this topic. And that's us. That's what we do. That whole solar system doesn't have anyone else having this discussion. That whole galaxy, the whole universe, there's no one else that can do this. And so the fact that God put it all into reality is because He wants us to connect to Him, which gives us infinite importance. So our importance is not on how big we are physically, it's on the meaning that we bring to that entire system. You have to remember that God is not big either. He's infinite. And infinite means that there's nothing so big that it's too big for Him, and nothing so small that it's too small for Him. We often make the mistake of thinking of God as being big, bigger than everything. That you can talk about a person. There are important people. There are people who are big, who are powerful, who don't have time for you and me. They're busy with big issues. They don't have time for us. God is not big, He's infinite, which means He has infinite time for everyone. Every move you make is significant to Him because He chose you. He chose to be in a relationship with you. So because He's infinite, there's nothing too small. And it's we that He's interested in. It's we that He's bothered with. Our actions impact Him. So that makes us infinitely significant in this whole system. But the significance comes from the purpose that we bring to the world. Not how much money we've made or how tall we are, but how much goodness we bring to the world, because that's actually what matters to God. So this is a contemplation to bring about awe of God. This is already stage 2 in developing a sense of awe. The entry stage was that God is watching you. That there's a watching eye watching you. And that is the basis that we have to base our moral life on, that we're being watched, that we're answerable. But taking it bigger than that, to appreciate who is watching us. Who cares about my behavior? It's the God that created all of this. That what's going on Jupiter is not the center of the universe. What's going on in my moral life is the center of the universe. That's actually what matters. And it's my behavior that impacts the entire universe, that gives all the universe its meaning. Yeah.
Somebody told me once how to visualize something. Yud Hey Vav Hey. Yud Hey Vav Hey. And then He sits in us all the time.
Right. Yeah. That's an idea the Kabbalist right, that the human body is shaped like the head is a Yud, the arms are like a Hey, the body and the torso is like a Vav, and the legs like a Hey, which is God's name. That God is present in our actions. We're representing Him. We're He's living through us the life of a finite being. And that's God's presence. And that overrides the vastness of the entire universe. However big the entire universe is, the moral universe is in our day-to-day activities, what we do today. That's a huge thought. That's an awe-inspiring thought. It's hard to then just leave your lunch tray and walk away. You can't just not care about life and just be careless. Like why wouldn't you let the guy in? There's so much traffic. Let him in. Like, in the expanseness of the universe, does it matter if there's a car in front of me? But that small act of letting somebody in front of me matters to God more than the entire universe. That's what the world was created for. In Psalms it says, Olam Chesed Yibana, the world was created for kindness. It was an act of kindness that God created the world. No one deserved it, he just did it. And it's kindness that maintains the world. An act of kindness maintains the world. So suddenly, it's a big deal when you do something good. That's really big. Bigger than the entire universe.
And how come there's so much evil? And one almost thinks that the evil is overcoming the good now in our life.
Human beings have free choice. We were given free choice. We're not puppets. We were given this world and we were told, you have to choose. Are you going to be good or not? Are you going to live a selfish life, an evil life, an immoral life or not? It's totally our choice. We're not forced either way. And that choice is not always an easy one. It's not. Like this was the gamble, as it were, that God made. That he could create angels that are puppets, but there's no point. Human beings who have real free choice, and it means that the choice is sometimes the wrong choice. But the world is not as evil as it looks on the news. The news only reports bad news. There's a lot of goodness going on in the world, and there's a lot of good that still can be done. There's a lot that needs to be worked on, and evil is real, and evil does exist. But we've also, in some ways, come a long way. The world has come a long way. We're bothered by evil much more today than ever in history, which is something. We have to do something about it as well. But it's not all bad. But we have free choice. And this way of thinking means that the good that I do is not just my little personal issue. It's not just I did a nice thing, but the world is still so bad. It's that has a ripple effect that impacts the entire universe, because the entire universe was created for those good acts. So I give meaning to the entire universe, I impact the entire universe. And a small amount of light can banish a lot of darkness. So that one good deed can overcome a lot of darkness in the world, can tip things into the right direction. Our evil inclination tries to bring us down and say that the world is so bad, so full of evil. What difference does it make if I do something nice, if I'm doing something good? It's a dark, wicked world. That's just our evil inclination, the Yetzer Hara, trying to dissuade us from doing good. The truth is that the good that we do has a huge impact. So this is the next level of being in awe of God. But even that is still considered what's called in the Aramaic from the Zohar, Yira Tata, a lower level of awe. To be in awe of God because He's watching you is a lower level. To be in awe of God because He created the entire universe, and look at how amazing this huge universe it is, and it's nothing compared to Him, that's still a lower level of awe, because you're being inspired to be in awe of God by looking at His creation. And after all, His creation is not a big deal for Him. You're not looking at Him yet. You're looking at His creation. There's a deeper level of awe. Says the Tanya, as for higher awe, an awe stemming from a sense of shame. Shame not here meaning embarrassment, but shame like that in front of God's light, you can't possibly be an ego. You'd be ashamed of yourself to be an ego. An inner fear that derives from the inward aspects of godliness within the worlds. It was said concerning this that where there is no wisdom, there is no awe. Back to the statement that we started with, the Talmudic statement. It started where there's no awe, there's no wisdom. Meaning you first have to start with awe. God is watching you. That God is present. And that your actions matter. What you do impacts the universe. That's the awe you have to start with. That will bring to wisdom. Then you'll have clarity of what's right and wrong. Without awe of God, your mind is muddled. You don't see things for what they are. You don't have that clarity of vision. You don't have wisdom. When you have awe of God, then you can have wisdom. But that's the basic level of awe. To reach the higher level of awe, an awe not of God's creation, not that He's watching me, but of God Himself, to be in awe of Him. Not of His effect on me or of what He created, but of Him Himself. That's a much deeper awe, and that you need wisdom to get to awe. The first level, you need to start with awe, the lower awe, to get to wisdom. But now we're saying, to get to the higher awe, you need wisdom to get to awe. What is this wisdom that we need to get to awe? So this, he says, from the Talmud. Who is wise? He who sees what is being born. In Hebrew, haroya es noilad, what is being born. What does that mean? Who is wise? He who sees what is being born. What does that mean? You want to have wisdom? To have wisdom, you have to be able to see what is being born. You don't get what that means? That's a very cryptic statement. I guess you have to be wise to understand what it means. I don't.
Consequences.
What do you mean?
Like what is being born, like what will come of a particular action or
So, what is being born means what's going to come out of it.
Yeah.
That the average person sees what's happening. A wise person sees what's going to happen as a result. Anticipates the next move. What's being born, meaning what's going to come out of this. That's what wisdom is. Wisdom is knowing what is going to result from your actions. How things are going to end up. So, a visionary is always somebody who senses where things are going, as opposed to just being stuck in the present. They see what's coming next. Someone who has that prophetic almost vision, where they know a real leader is somebody who is not just looking at things as they are now, but they're seeing over the horizon. They're seeing where things are leading. And so often a wise person will be somebody who will be warning everybody, this is not a good idea. And everyone's going to say, what do you mean? It's great. I'm telling you, it's not going to be a good ending. The wise person sees the ending, sees what's going to be born, sees what's coming. It hasn't been born yet, but he sees what's going to be born. That's the literal meaning of this statement of the Talmud, that wisdom is the ability to sense what's going to be. But Rabbi Shneur Zalman explains it with a bit of a mystical twist. And he plays on these words. What does it mean who sees what is being born? He says it a bit differently. Who is wise? He who sees what is being born. That is to say, he sees how everything originates and comes into being ex nihilo, from nothing, by means of the word of God and the breath of his mouth. Says Rabbi Shneur Zalman, there's wisdom, meaning somebody who has the wisdom in worldly matters, who is a visionary, a leader. That's the simple level of this. But there's a deeper type of wisdom, the wisdom of being able to see that the world is constantly being born, that this world is coming from somewhere, that it didn't make itself, it didn't appear from itself, it came from somewhere, and it is constantly coming from somewhere, from its nothingness. There's a word of God, the breath of God's mouth, that is constantly creating this universe. Not that he created the world once upon a time, but he is constantly creating it at every moment. The world is being born at every moment. That this moment just happened. It just got born. God created it just now. This, says Rabbi Shneur Zalman, is wisdom. Wisdom is the ability to see that the world is being created at every moment. This is an idea that he develops very much in his works. That creation was not a one-off event, that God created the world and then left it, but God is constantly recreating the world at every moment. The world cannot exist on its own. It can't be on autopilot. It has to have the divine energy pumping its existence constantly. If God would leave the world would cease to exist. God is recreating the world at every moment. This moment is not a repeat of the moment before. It is a recreated reality where God just made the world now. He created, he gave it its vitality and existence at this moment. If you can see that, then you're wise. Not just if you can know it, not just if you can believe it or understand it, that's already something. But that's not yet wisdom. A wise person is somebody who sees the constant recreation at every moment, the immanence of God at every moment. What does this actually mean? That if we see God as being the creator, who created this amazing universe once upon a time, so he is somewhat of a distant player in that creation. He created the world and he's watching it, watching over it, observing it. But that's not an immediate presence of God. If the world is being recreated anew at every moment, that means that God is right here, right now. That every detail of creation is deliberate. He's behind it. That makes God much more of an immediate being in my intimate life, in everything that I'm doing. He's right there. There's no accident. There's nothing that just happens. Everything is the divine hand in every move that I make, in everything that's happening around me. God is behind it. If you can see that, then you're wise. Which means if your immediate reaction to anything that happens to you is, this is God's will, this is the way it's supposed to happen, now I have to determine what's my appropriate reaction. What am I supposed to do now? That's my choice. But what happens to me is the divine plan. If you can see life like that, then that's wise. That's wisdom. We sometimes, in retrospect, will say, yeah, okay, so God's hand was there. But at the time, in the moment, it's not always easy to see. Particularly when things are not exactly working out the way we plan them to work out. At that moment, you feel, where are you, God? But if you can see at that moment, then no, God is creating the world at this moment. So he's putting me in a situation that I need to be in right now. Maybe not I want to be in, but I need to be in right now. Because nothing is created by itself. Everything's created constantly by God. So therefore, this moment is where I'm supposed to be. This is where God has put me. Then you have wisdom, the ability to see what is being born, that the world is being born again every moment, created from nothing. When you have that vision, therefore the entire universe is truly nullified in reality, within the word of God and the breath of his mouth, and there is nothing at all. When you see the world that way, so then there's no world separate from God. There's not that there's God and there's a world he created. There is the world that God is constantly creating. You can't separate the two. So what we see as the universe, that's nothing. It's just God's breath. It's the world that God is creating. This is not to say that the universe is an imaginary thing or that it's an illusion or we don't exist. That's not what we're saying here. But the idea that there's an existence outside of God, no, there isn't. There's just God and what he's creating. There's nothing else. Like if you recall, we spoke about several weeks ago when you conjure an image in your mind, a scene in your mind, you imagine it, and you can imagine a scene with people and with a background, people running along that beach that we were looking at before. You can imagine a whole scene, a whole family, and a whole life going on. Imagine you were able to also bestow those people with identity, with autonomy, with their own life. That you could give them the ability to make their own decisions, to choose what they wanted to do, to say what they wanted to say. You actually can't, because you're deciding what they say. But imagine you could. So you've created this scene, you've created these people, you've given them this existence. But in the end, their entire existence is your imagination that you created. Nothing in that scene exists without you. If you decide that all of a sudden that white sand is all rocks, it's rocks. You didn't have to go anywhere to get rocks. You didn't have to move the sand away. It didn't take any time. The sand can turn into rocks in your mind instantaneously. And suddenly those people are walking on rocks. Because it's your imagination. And then if you say, I'm sick of this, and you think of something else, it's gone. The rocks, the beach, the people, it's finished. The whole thing's gone. Because it was totally your creation. The world is the same. The entire universe is God's creation from nothing. He made it. He made it up. Not that it's not real, because your imagination is just imagination. God's imagination is God's imagination. For God to imagine something, that's reality. That is real. But it's totally Him. It's His world. The amazing thing about it is that He's given us free choice in that world. But everything that exists in that world is Him and nothing else. When that concept is understood and then meditated upon and marinated upon and absorbed and focused to the point where it's real, where you actually look at the world that way, that's when you've got wisdom that leads to awe, the higher level of awe. When you're in awe of God because there's nothing else, there's only Him. Nothing else really exists. It's all Him. It's very difficult when you're on that level to be worried about anything else other than, am I doing what God wants? Am I fulfilling the purpose that the universe was created for? Nothing else really matters. As long as I'm doing the right thing, I'm doing good, so then that's the whole universe, that's everything. Because the universe doesn't exist separate from God. And so therefore God's will is all there is. But for that you need wisdom. That you need to actually see that the world is being born every moment from God. That you not just know it, but see it. And therefore that is not so easy. So, when you reach there, you realize, as Rabbi Shneur Zalman says, you are no exception to this principle. For also your body and soul are nullified in the Word of God. It's not just that the entire universe is all the divine voice, but you're also in that. You're a part of that as well. When you realize that, you're awestruck. It's one thing to say that God made this entire universe and really it's just the breath of his mouth. It's nothing compared to Him. But when you then include yourself in that picture and say, and me too, I'm also a part of that oneness of God, that's awe-striking. You know, they say a story that Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Kotsk, one of the great Hasidic masters, asked one of his students, tell me, when you say the Shema, what do you think about? Shema Yisrael, when you say the Hero Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is, what do you think about? So he said, I think about what it says in Jewish law you're supposed to think about. He says, what's that? He says, when you say the word Echad, that God is one, you're supposed to elongate the word, meaning you're supposed to meditate on the word Echad. And so the Kotzker Rebbe said, but what do you think about? What do you think about? And God is one, like, how much can you think already? So he says, but in the law, in the book of Jewish law, it says you should think about the word Echad has 3 letters, Aleph, Ches, and Dalet. The letter Aleph is the first letter of the alphabet, meaning one. God is one. The letter Ches is the 8th letter of the alphabet, that God is one in the 7 heavens and earth. And then Dalet is the 4th letter of the alphabet, that God is one in all 4 directions. That's what I meditate on, that God is one in the 7 heavens and earth and in all 4 directions. So the Kotzker said, and that's all? He said, yeah, I mean, that's all. He said, you're missing something. He said, what am I missing? I mean, in the code of Jewish law, it says that that's what you're supposed to think. What am I missing? He says, he's also one in you. Don't forget about you as well. He's one in the heavens and the earth in all directions. And also you, in your life as well. There's just God. There's nothing but God in the heavens and the earth. And also where you are, there's nothing but God as well. You're no exception. That the oneness of God, the all-encompassingness of God is including the space that you take. It's just God as well. When that becomes real to you, then you're awestruck. You realize that I'm not just in the presence of God, I'm not just created by God, but there's just God and nothing else. I'm a part of that reality as well. But for that you need wisdom. And that's not so easy. So while the first level of fear, which is that God is watching you, that anyone can reach just by remembering that fact. God is watching. If a poster on the wall with eyes on it can make you behave better, so then a thought that the divine eye is watching over you can make you behave better. That's all you need. You just have to be reminded of that. The second level of fear, which is where you look at the expansiveness of the universe, that God created this entire universe, and all this is not even an effort for Him. That is a higher level of awe, where you're in awe of God's power. And that takes a bit more thought. But with a bit of contemplation, we can get there as well. But to reach the upper level of awe, where there's nothing but God, where you actually see the divine breath that creates the world and there's nothing else, you need wisdom for that. You need a lot of contemplation for that. You need to reach a certain level for that. And that we can strive for, but that's not so easy. The lower levels of awe, someone's watching you, or looking at the vast of the universe, that's within our grasp. The higher level of awe, sensing the divine as the only true existence, that you need wisdom. You need to be able to see the oneness of God. That's not so easy. And so because Tanya is the book of Beinanim, the book for the average person, the struggler, so fear of God for a Beinani means entry-level fear is available to us all. Eyes watching you. Awe of creation and creator takes a simple contemplation. If you think it through about the awesomeness of the universe, spend a bit of time on the beach and look at the grains of sand and then look at the stars, you can actually get a sense of awe that God created all this and I matter. In all of this, my actions matter. What I do does matter. There's an eye watching me in this expansive universe. That's pretty awe-inspiring. The higher awe needs wisdom, which is spiritual vision, where you actually can see that the divine breath is creating the world from nothing at every moment. There's nothing but God, including me. I'm a part of the nothing but. There's just God. That takes a higher level of enlightenment and wisdom that we don't all get to, but perhaps we can have glimpses of. So the Beinani, the struggler, can reach all three. You can reach all three, but at the very least must live with the first level and work on graduating to the next level. We should live with the idea that God is watching us and try to be in awe of His creation, and then every now and then get a little glimpse of the divine reality that is all-encompassing, that nothing else really exists. And that is a higher level of awe. But when it comes to on a day-to-day basis, to get us to pick up our tray and put it away, or to let that person in, or to be a bit kinder, or to say the prayers even when we're not in the mood, there's an eye watching, waiting, that the entire universe is meaningless in comparison to the one good deed that you do. And when you do a good deed, you bring meaning to that entire vast universe. Okay. Any last questions, comments? Okay. Go out into that vast universe out there.